Keanu, since you've been talking so much about spirituality and human connection, the host began, his voice taking on a slightly more serious tone, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on spiritual leaders who are trying to bridge divides between different communities? I'm thinking specifically of Pope Francis. He's done a lot to reach out to people, showing a side of faith that connects with many different cultures. What's your take on him? The audience waited in anticipation, wondering how Keanu would respond. Pope Francis, despite his global stature, was a polarizing figure for some, and the question seemed like a natural pivot to Keanu's philosophy on life. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair, his thoughtful expression never wavering. Pope Francis is an interesting figure, he said slowly, considering the weight of his words. I admire him for how he's approached his role. He doesn't just preach from the pulpit, he actively seeks to understand others, especially the marginalized. He's shown a willingness to go beyond traditional boundaries and try to find common ground with people who may not share the same beliefs. The host nodded, intrigued by Keanu's take. So, do you think there's something more to Pope Francis than just the figurehead of the Catholic Church? Something more personal or spiritual about him that people might not know? Keanu's eyes flickered, as if he was about to share something deeper, something more significant. Actually, yes, he replied, his voice taking on a more serious tone. There's more to him than just the public persona. He's done a lot of work in private, connecting with indigenous communities, seeking to understand their spirituality in ways that the church hasn't done before. That's something that many people don't realize. He's trying to bridge the gap between modern faith and ancient traditions, and that's an incredibly powerful thing. The host was taken aback by the unexpected depth of Keanu's response. Wait, he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. Are you saying that Pope Francis has gone beyond what's publicly known to study indigenous spiritual practices? Keanu nodded, his expression serious. Yes. It's not something that's widely discussed, but it's part of his journey. And I think it's something worth acknowledging. The studio grew quiet, the audience clearly intrigued by Keanu's revelation. The host, unsure how to process the gravity of what Keanu had just shared, looked out at the crowd. Well, that's definitely something I didn't expect to hear today, the host said, recovering from the shock. It's amazing to think that someone with so much power is seeking to understand spiritual traditions that are so far removed from the mainstream narrative. Keanu smiled softly, but his tone was resolute. Sometimes, the real work isn't in the spotlight. It's in the quiet moments when you connect with something deeper, something beyond the surface. The host, clearly taken aback by Keanu's words, sat up straighter, eager to press on with the conversation. There was a deep curiosity in his eyes as he looked at Keanu, trying to understand just how much the actor knew about Pope Francis' private actions. So, you're telling me that Pope Francis has actually been involved in something this profound behind the scenes? The host asked, his voice filled with awe. Are you saying he's been studying indigenous spirituality, even learning from their sacred ceremonies? Keanu nodded, his expression calm but resolute. Yes. It's more than just a theological study or an intellectual pursuit. It's a spiritual journey for him. Pope Francis has been spending time with indigenous leaders, participating in their ceremonies in private, and embracing their understanding of faith and connection to nature. The audience, still captivated, exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe what Keanu was revealing. The idea that such a high-profile religious figure would be quietly delving into practices so far removed from the traditional Catholic narrative was both shocking and inspiring. The host, now slightly lost for words, asked, "And this has been happening under the radar? Why hasn't this been made public?" Keanu took a deep breath, sensing the weight of his revelation. I think it's because Pope Francis doesn't want the attention. He's not doing it for show. His goal isn't to make headlines, but to understand something beyond what the Church traditionally teaches. He's searching for a deeper connection to humanity and the planet, and the indigenous people have a wisdom to offer in that regard. The host was silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of Keanu's words. He glanced out at the audience, who were equally stunned by the unexpected turn in the conversation. "That's unbelievable," the host finally said. "You're saying the Pope is doing this kind of work quietly, and yet it could completely change the way we view spirituality." Keanu nodded again. "Exactly. Sometimes, the most important things aren't what we see in the headlines, but the quiet actions that people take in the background." The audience, now completely entranced by the conversation, sat in rapt attention. The studio had shifted from an entertainment interview to a moment of profound reflection, as Keanu's words about Pope Francis were sparking a deeper conversation about faith, humanity, and connection. As Keanu spoke, the host's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. He leaned forward, still processing the weight of what he had just heard. "Keanu," he said slowly, "this is incredible. But I've never heard anything about this before. Are you sure? I mean, it's hard to imagine that something as significant as this wouldn't have made headlines. Why would Pope Francis keep something like this so quiet?" Keanu met the host's gaze calmly, understanding the skepticism. "It's not about secrecy," he said, his voice measured but firm. "It's about respect. The Pope is not interested in the public spectacle, he's focused on something much deeper. When he connects with these communities, it's not for a photo op. He's there because he believes in something beyond doctrine, something spiritual, something unspoken. And sometimes, to truly understand, you have to step away from the limelight." The host paused, his mind racing with the implications of Keanu's words. "But this is Pope Francis we're talking about," he said, trying to process the information. "The leader of the Catholic Church. If what you're saying is true, this could change everything we know about his role and what the Church stands for." Keanu nodded slowly, his expression softening. "Maybe it should change the way we see things. Pope Francis is about action, not just words. He's not trying to change the world in a dramatic, public way. He's trying to create quiet, meaningful change. And that's why people need to know." The host, still in disbelief, looked out at the audience, who were hanging on every word. This is huge, Keanu. If it's true, this could change the way we look at faith itself." Keanu, looking at the host, replied, "It's not about changing faith, it's about embracing a deeper understanding of it. The world is moving toward a time when we need to look beyond divisions and embrace what connects us all. And sometimes, that means learning from those who have been overlooked." The audience, now quiet with awe, absorbed the weight of Keanu's words. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence as the conversation took on a more profound tone than anyone had expected. The usual energy of a late-night show was gone, replaced by something much more thoughtful and reflective. The host, still grappling with the magnitude of Keanu's revelation, pressed on, eager to understand more. "Keanu, I'm fascinated by this, but I need to ask, how did you come to know all of this? I mean, this isn't the kind of thing that just gets casually discussed in the media. How are you so sure of what you're saying?" Keanu, always composed, leaned in slightly, his tone as calm as ever. "It's not something I just know in the conventional sense," he explained. "I've had the privilege of being in the right place at the right time. I've met with people who've been involved in these circles, leaders in indigenous communities, people who have worked alongside Pope Francis. It's not public knowledge because the Pope isn't seeking recognition for it. But I know the impact it's had. The work is real, and it's changing lives." The host, wide-eyed and slightly in awe, absorbed Keanu's words. He was beginning to realize that this wasn't just some fanciful claim, it was something Keanu had personal insight into. "So, you're saying Pope Francis is actively seeking out these indigenous communities, learning from them, and applying their teachings in private?" Keanu nodded, his gaze steady. "Yes, exactly. He believes there is a wisdom in these communities that the rest of the world is missing. They live with a deep connection to the earth, to spirituality in a way that modern society has largely forgotten. The Pope understands this, and is quietly embracing it. It's not a political move, it's a spiritual one." The audience remained hushed, their interest now piqued even further. The interview, which had begun with typical light-hearted banter, was now focused on something much more profound, something that seemed to transcend the usual entertainment news. The host, still visibly processing Keanu's deep insight, turned toward the audience. There was a mixture of disbelief and awe on his face as he turned back to Keanu, attempting to understand just how much Keanu truly knew about Pope Francis' personal spiritual journey. "Keanu, I have to be honest," the host said, his voice tinged with a mix of amazement and skepticism. "I've never heard anything like this. It's one thing to hear rumors, but you're speaking about this so matter-of-factly. Do you think the world is ready for this kind of truth? I mean, Pope Francis has such a massive following. If this came out, it could shake the very foundations of how people see the church and spirituality." Keanu, without hesitation, nodded. Maybe it would shake things up. But sometimes, shaking things up is necessary. The world is changing, and we need leaders who are willing to step outside the confines of tradition and embrace something new. Something deeper. Pope Francis has understood that it's not just about religion, it's about humanity, connection, and respecting all walks of life. His quiet work, his unspoken actions, speak volumes about the kind of change we need. The host looked down for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of Keanu's words. The gravity of the situation seemed to be sinking in for him as well. But how has this not been publicized? This kind of spiritual awakening, this bridge between ancient traditions and modern faith, why hasn't the Vatican made this more known? Keanu leaned back in his chair, his face calm yet earnest. Pope Francis doesn't want to make headlines for this. He's not trying to prove anything to anyone. He's doing this work because it's needed. These communities, these people, have been overlooked for so long. He sees their wisdom, and he wants to learn from them. It's about the quiet power of understanding, not the loud power of public opinion. The host, now realizing just how profound Keanu's words were, took a moment to collect himself. The audience was completely captivated by this conversation. What had started as a typical celebrity interview had transformed into something far more impactful, a discussion on faith, human connection, and the transformative power of understanding. As Keanu finished speaking, the studio fell into an almost eerie silence. The usual hum of excitement had vanished, replaced by the deep weight of his words. The audience was rapt, unsure of how to respond. Some seemed reflective, taking in the profound implications of what Keanu had revealed. Others exchanged uncertain glances, still processing the unexpected shift in the tone of the interview. The host, sensing the collective shift in mood, turned toward the camera. "Well, I think we've just had a moment here that's going to stick with a lot of people," he said, his voice quieter now. Keanu's shared something that challenges the way we view not only Pope Francis but spirituality itself. It's something that's sure to have people talking and thinking. The audience, still processing, gave a small, tentative round of applause. It wasn't the usual energetic cheer that Keanu typically received, but more of a quiet acknowledgement of the depth of the conversation they had just witnessed. This wasn't just about entertainment anymore. This was about something real, something that transcended the usual topics of celebrity and media. Keanu, ever humble, gave a small smile but remained silent, letting the moment linger. He wasn't looking for applause or praise, he had simply shared his truth. It was a rare and deeply human moment in a space usually filled with jokes and surface-level chatter.